The man who lives in this house makes very good orange marmalade. He also breeds orchids. He has never eaten a dish of tripe in his life, and he wishes that his dog could speak to him. And that eccentric sequence of autobiographical irrelevancies may even give you a clue as to who he is. He's Roald Dahl, of Norwegian and Welsh origins, and by now probably the most widely read author of children's books in the entire world. Titles like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, James and the Giant Peach, Danny the Champion of the World, and most recently, the BFG, the Big Friendly Giant. They're the sort of books that have brought him such a worldwide readership that he's reputed to spend £200 a month on postage alone, just answering the letters from his young readers. He has remained sufficiently disciplined to spend 4 hours each day in his writing hut at the top of the garden.
I couldn't possibly work in the house, especially when there used to be a lot of children around, and even when there aren't children, there are vacuum cleaners and people bustling about. No, I always write in this little hut. I always have. It is absolutely quiet up here. It may not be pretty or tidy, and it certainly hasn't been cleaned, and the floor hasn't been swept for 5 years at least. So it's full of everything. The only thing I did remove about 2 years ago, we had a goat that got in, and there was some goat droppings on the floor, and I thought, well, I better get a dustpan and sweep those up, and I did. I've taken a great deal of trouble with the actual chair I sit in and the place I put my feet, which is tied to the legs of the chair so I don't shove it away when I press my feet against it. Also in the winter I get into a sleeping bag, and that's right up to my chest. Keep the feet warm, the legs warm. And I always use 6 pencils, and they always have to be sharpened before I start. Finally, you get settled. You get into a sort of nest. Pour myself a bit of coffee. Well, there's all sorts of funny things have gathered on this table beside me here over the years. For example, this, believe it or not, was one of my own hip bones, which was sawed off my hip because of there's osteoarthritis. And when they saw that off, they then put that in its place. It's called a prosthesis. What else have we got here? This, well, that's another operation. That's the result of a spine operation, one of the 6 I've had. These are the chippings of a prolapsed disc in your spine. And the surgeon put them in there and gave them to me. And they've been there for years, just for fun. Well, the first thing I do when I come in is I always sweep my writing board clean, because it's full of little bits of rubber and stuff from the time before. I make these boards myself so that I can get them exactly the right size. I put billiard cloth on the top. And on this board, of course, I wrote the last book that I finished, which incidentally is called Matilda. For about 20 years, I've had a tiny little note in my notebook saying, do a story about a child who can make things move with her eyes alone. And I've kept looking at this over the years. And finally, a little over a year ago, I decided I'd have a go at it. The first time Matilda discovers this power of hers, she gets angry with the headmistress, and the headmistress has a glass of water in front of her. And she stares at the glass of water and suddenly has a wish to tip it over into the headmistress's lap. And she feels the power suddenly surging behind her eyes. And she sees it just wobble a little bit and start to tip And she pushes harder with her eyes and harder. And suddenly, over it goes. The pencil doesn't very often touch the paper. It's looking and musing and correcting, and then you do a little writing. And in the end, you get something done. But your concentration is fairly intense. You're lost. You're into this world of the story that you happen to be doing. It's terrifically demanding, you know. What do I write? 4.5 hours a day. So a quarter of my waking hours, I am completely immersed in a dotty world of fantasy. And you come out, you know, in a kind of moony state. All right, Hilary, what have we got this morning?
Well, we have an enormous book here from a school in Norfolk. And a lot of pictures and letters as well.
Well, that's super, isn't it?
Dahl's books for children have made him immensely famous and rich. A children's bestseller goes on selling and on and on. And he's had several. It's his mixture of the quirky, the bizarre, and sometimes downright shocking that children love.
Hello, gorgeous Anita. And all the brilliant children who sent me such lovely pictures and letters.
And they adore the way he takes their side in his books and letters, and the way he steers them deliciously close to the wickedly unconventional and rude.
All right, Hilary, we've done the letters. Here's a bit more manuscript for you. No, I've got a Norwegian name. I've been saddled with it all my life. I might as well hang on to it for the last few remaining years.
Mm. But was it meant to be Ronald?
No, it wasn't, because my father and mother were Norwegian. Mm. So they naturally give me a Norwegian name.
Well, a myth has crept up about that. I was told that the N had been left out and that really you weren't to be called Ronald.
Not at all. No. I was called after a hero of my father's, the first man to get to the South Pole.
Right, well...
Roald Amundsen.
Roald.
Roald.
Roald. Yeah. Roald. Is this an impossible question to answer? Is it easier to write for adults as it is to write for children? Because you've done both successfully.
No, it's much harder to write for children. Mm-hmm. If we're talking about high quality, top grade, so the equivalent of Graham Greene's quality in children's books, it's harder to do them for children.
Why?
I don't know why. The obvious answer, of course, is that children have less concentration. It's harder to hold them to the page. They're easily distracted. But the other real reason it's hard is that by the time you're old enough to be skillful enough to write a book, adult or children's, you're an adult and you've forgotten what it's like to be a child. And that's the real problem. I mean, if a 7-year-old had the skill of being able to write so beautifully and superbly and conjure up a plot and everything else, that would be the one to do it, because they'd know exactly.
So then how do you reckon, then, that you've kept in touch with the child's mind?
Oh, it's some sort of pure luck, that, you know, to be able to throw yourself back into this. I think you've got to have a sort of, you've got to be a bit of an ass, in a way. You've got to be a giggler. You've got to be a fellow who, there's not many fellows of 66 who rock with laughter at knock-knock jokes and things like that, you know, which I do all the time, and other childish jokes. I mean, most people, male or female, by that age, or even by 40 or 50, have become pretty serious and moderately pompous. And that's no good, is it? Huh?
Well, saddened by life, maybe. You could have been, but you apparently don't seem to be.
No, not. I think that saddened isn't such a bad thing. It's being successful, say a successful stockbroker or businessman or even a doctor or whatever. I think the more successful you become in any profession, the more serious you become.
A rural vantage point in a small home counties village hasn't restricted Dahl's vision. His wide-ranging interests, from the domestic to the romantic, contribute hugely to the pleasure of reading his books. His stories are like his life, full of offbeat bits of colour and knowledge. He's about as near as you'll find to a 20th century Renaissance man.
I love pictures, and I've always collected pictures, even when I couldn't afford to buy them. And now I have some good ones, lovely ones. I love wine, and have several thousand bottles in the cellar. I love furniture, especially 18th century English furniture. I love cultivating plants, especially orchids. A lot of things, you know. I think nearly everyone, every sane and semi-intelligent person likes those sort of things. We have a good snooker table in the house, and we play 3 times a week, and that's played with my local friends. Sunday's a long session. I mean, we start at 6:30, 4 of us, and we finish about 11. And someone brings in some sausages in the middle. That's lovely, snooker. I mean, it is so difficult to play, you see. And what infuriates all of us, and I think especially me, is it's one thing that you cannot get really good at, however hard you try, unless you are supremely gifted, born with it.
That's the one. That's the one. That's 10p. Play for that one. That's a pound roll.
You're very successful. Why do you still write? You don't need to presumably work anymore.
Oh, no, I love it. I love it, yes. I don't know what I'd do without having something to work and worry about all day.
You've been telling the children who write to you that you're now 66, you're getting old and you're feeling old, and if I may say so, you're not looking old. You look as if you're going to go on forever.
No, I feel very ancient.
When eventually you do finally have to give up or want to give up, whichever comes first.
When I die.
When you die?
Yeah.
Is there any particular way in which you want to have been remembered? Say by a child who turns into an adult?
Well, you can quote Oscar Wilde and say, when I am gone, I hope it will be said, my sins were scarlet, but my books were red.